He stopped aging at 9 years old. For decades, doctors called it a fraud, a desperate stunt by grieving parents who couldn't accept that their boy was different. Newspapers tore the family apart, claiming it was all about money. Scientists who traveled to the small town hoping to study him left disappointed, or terrified, though they'd never admit why. But then years later, long after the story faded from headlines, someone found a body. A body that shouldn't have existed. Perfect skin, tiny hands, eyes half open as if he'd been waiting. And that's when the truth started to unravel, too late for anyone to do anything about it. What if he never truly stopped aging, but instead changed in ways we can't understand? What if those who called it a hoax were only protecting us from something far darker? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most chilling unsolved cases you've probably never heard of. We'll explore the family's hidden records, disturbing medical notes, and the eerie final footage that surfaced just months ago. So turn off the lights, make sure your doors are locked, and stay with us until the end, because once you learn what was really found inside that coffin, you'll wish you never pressed play. And if stories like this haunt you as much as they haunt us, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. It started in the suffocating heat of the summer of 1978, in a town so small it didn't even have its own stoplight. The local joke was that if you blinked driving through, you'd miss it entirely, just a cluster of wooden porches sagging under their own weight, a single grocery store that doubled as a post office, and a narrow Baptist church with a tin roof that rattled every time the wind picked up. People here minded their business, trusted their neighbors, and believed more in scripture than in doctors. That was before Eli Weaver. The Weavers were ordinary folk. Margaret, with her neat bun and pressed blouses, ran the tiny library, stamping books with a tired smile. David was a heavy-set man with a voice like gravel who spent 12 hours a day fixing machines at the mill, and the rest of his time nursing cheap bourbon on their front porch. Their only child, Eli, was a boy with a bright laugh and an endless curiosity. Up until he turned 9. At first no one noticed. Kids grow at different rates. But by the time Eli should have been shooting up like a weed, cracking his voice and sprouting peach fuzz on his lip, he still looked stubbornly like that same round-faced 9-year-old. Year after year. Margaret took him to Dr. Graves, an old GP whose office smelled like mothballs and iodine. The doctor poked and prodded, scratched notes in an ancient ledger, then assured them boys sometimes just take their sweet time. When Eli turned 12 and still wore the same scuffed little sneakers from 3 birthdays ago, people began to whisper. Church ladies clutched their rosaries tighter. Boys who once played tag with Eli now crossed the street to avoid him. He doesn't smell right, one kid told his mother, sobbing. Like old pennies in wet dirt. Margaret ignored it. God works in mysterious ways, she told David over dinner. But David stopped meeting her eyes. At night, he took to sleeping on the couch, a shotgun propped against the wall. Then came the day the traveling carnival rolled through town. Margaret insisted they go, for Eli's sake, she chirped, smoothing his hair back, ignoring how the boy flinched at her touch. Under the bright swirl of lights, Eli clutched a bag of kettle corn, eyes wide not with joy but something like dread. He froze near the pony rides, his tiny hand tightening on Margaret's arm. What is it, sweetheart? She asked. Eli didn't answer. He simply stared at the ponies until they skittered, snorting and trying to pull away from their handlers, whites of their eyes showing. One broke loose, tearing down the midway, nearly trampling a family. After that, even Margaret couldn't pretend everything was fine. She brought Eli to Dr. Howell in the city, a specialist who ordered blood work, x-rays, pages of tests. Eli endured it all with eerie patience, never complaining, never blinking when needles pierced his skin. The results came back an enigma. No growth markers, no hormonal changes, no genetic anomalies within detectable range. Subject appears biologically paused. Dr. Howell recommended more invasive testing. Margaret refused. He's in God's hands now, she snapped, dragging Eli out by the wrist. They left behind a pile of unpaid invoices. That's when the press caught wind. A slick-haired reporter named Ray Benton arrived, pushing past polite small-town manners, waving cash at neighbors for gossip. He took photographs on the Weaver porch. Eli sat in a suit 2 sizes too large, hands folded primly on his knees, dark eyes locked on the lens with a coldness that made even Benton swallow hard. When the article hit, the boy who never grew, miracle, curse, or hoax? Their town became a carnival of its own. Vans with satellite dishes parked outside. People trespassed for a glimpse through the curtains. Margaret started holding prayer circles, waving pamphlets that claimed Eli was God's messenger. Donations poured in. Meanwhile, David withered. He was found drunk in his truck more than once, staring at the woods, muttering, "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for none of it." The last time anyone saw him, he was stumbling into the trees behind their house at dusk, clutching a bottle. They found the bottle days later, shattered at the base of a tree slick with something dark. David never came home. After that, things grew stranger. Dogs refused to walk past the Weavers' gate. Children claimed they saw Eli outside at odd hours, barefoot in the frost, eyes rolled back, whispering to someone who wasn't there. The mailman reported hearing giggles behind him on the walk, only to turn and find the yard empty. Then one morning in October 1985, the town awoke to find the Weaver house silent. The windows were dark. The mailbox overflowed with unopened letters. A neighbor went to knock, found the door ajar. Inside, dishes sat in the sink, Margaret's Bible lay open on the table, pages stained with tears. Eli's bed was neatly made. The closet still held all their clothes. But the Weavers were gone. Police scoured the woods, dragged the pond out by the old mill, posted bulletins in distant cities. Nothing. No sign of footprints leading away. No bank withdrawals, no hotel check-ins. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Eventually the house was boarded up, the town too frightened to tear it down. Kids dared each other to run up and touch the door. Some came back sobbing, unable to say why. And so the legend of Eli Weaver settled like a mold over everything, growing in the dark. He became a ghost story, a caution whispered to keep children inside at night. Most thought that was the end of it. But last spring a young couple bought the old Weaver property at auction, hoping to fix it up and flip it. On their second day clearing the backyard, their shovel hit something solid. Something that sounded horribly hollow. When they uncovered it fully, they found an old wooden box, bound in iron chains engraved with crude symbols. The lock was rusted shut, the wood dark with age, or maybe something else. They called the police. And when that box was finally opened at the county morgue, well, that was when the story stopped being a local legend and became something far worse. Chapter 2, What They Found at the Morgue. Deputy Warren didn't like to admit he was superstitious. But the moment he stood over that half-dug hole in the Weaver's backyard, the air felt wrong, heavier somehow, humming in his ears like a wasp trapped in a jar. The wooden box they pulled out was about the size of a child's coffin, stained dark and wrapped in iron chains carved with rough, almost primitive symbols. Some of the links were fused together as if scorched by extreme heat. By the time the county coroner's van rolled up, half the neighborhood had gathered at the fence. People clutched their crosses, murmured prayers. Warren did too, under his breath. At the morgue, Dr. Ellen Price, a brisk, sharp-featured woman with a reputation for zero nonsense, took charge. Cameras weren't allowed, but rumors later claimed someone snuck in a cell phone and recorded everything. The official report would say little. But eyewitnesses, orderlies who later quit their jobs, told far darker stories. Price had the lock sawed off. When the lid finally creaked open, a stench of earth and something faintly sweet rolled out, not rot exactly but closer to damp flowers left too long in a vase. Inside lay what looked unmistakably like a boy of about 9. Pale skin stretched smooth over delicate bones, mouth slightly open, teeth small and white. His eyes weren't fully closed, a thin sliver of grayish-blue peeked out beneath the lids. The corpse wore what seemed to be an old-fashioned nightshirt, yellowed with age. His hands were folded neatly over his stomach. A rosary was wrapped so tightly around his wrist that it had cut deep grooves into the skin, or what passed for skin. When Price touched the body, she flinched. Later she'd write that it felt noticeably colder than ambient room temperature, bordering on unnaturally chilled. No signs of decomposition. No bloating, no discoloration. Price ordered a full-body scan. That's when things turned truly bizarre. The scan revealed something impossible. The heart inside this boy, if he could still be called that, was perfectly intact. Same with the brain. Organs that should have turned to sludge decades ago looked preserved, almost pristine. A biopsy was attempted. When Price tried to insert the needle, it bent slightly as though meeting unexpected resistance. Her notes only stated, tissue density anomalous. Not consistent with either mummification or embalming. Word spread quickly. Within 24 hours, local reporters swarmed the morgue's back entrance. A few broke in through a side door, snapping blurry photos of the corpse on a gurney, its eyes glinting eerily under harsh fluorescent lights. One tabloid ran the headline, "He never grew old, and now he won't stay dead." The story went national again, just like in the 80s. Networks sent sleek young anchors to stand outside the county building, breathless with morbid fascination. Conspiracy sites exploded with theories. Some blamed secret government experiments, others whispered about an ancient Appalachian cult that had once performed rituals in these woods. Meanwhile, the townspeople of Halston Hollow wanted nothing to do with it. Church attendance doubled overnight. Families kept their children indoors. Hardware stores sold out of padlocks and floodlights. Deputy Warren stayed on site, overseeing the body's security after receiving multiple threats from would-be grave robbers and paranormal enthusiasts. The town council demanded the remains be reburied immediately, but Dr. Price refused, citing unresolved forensic questions of significant scientific interest. A week later, things began to unravel. Late one evening, an orderly named Sam Reed was making his rounds when he heard soft humming coming from the cold room. Thinking someone had left a radio on, he pushed the door open. The lights inside flickered. What he saw made him drop his clipboard. The corpse of Eli Weaver, that's what everyone was calling it now, though no ID had yet confirmed it, was sitting upright on the slab, head tilted slightly as if listening. The humming stopped the moment Sam entered. He bolted, crashing into a cart in the hallway, breaking his wrist. The next morning, Dr. Price found the body exactly as before, lying flat, eyes half shut. She reprimanded Sam for spreading hysteria. But by then, 2 other orderlies had quit outright, claiming they'd heard someone whisper their names in the dark. Meanwhile, deeper tests continued. A specialist from the state lab arrived with advanced imaging tools, hoping to publish a paper that might launch his career. His team ran high-frequency scans. The initial readings came back garbled, the data full of erratic spikes, almost like electrical interference. They tried again. Same results. Finally, out of sheer frustration, one technician ran a thermal camera over the corpse. The monitor flared with sudden color. Not cold blue as expected, but pulsing faint yellows and oranges at the chest, as though something inside was still warm. The tech vomited right there on the floor. Dr. Price tried to keep it quiet, but someone leaked the footage. Within days, YouTube channels and late-night radio hosts pounced. Proof of the undead? They shouted. Or worse, was Eli Weaver feeding on something to stay preserved this long? In town, nerves frayed. Parents reported their children waking up screaming, saying a boy stood at the foot of their beds, asking to come inside. Dogs howled through the night. More than one family packed up and left altogether. Back at the morgue, Dr. Price finally made the call to transfer the body to a secure university facility out of state. The convoy was scheduled for Monday morning. But on Sunday night, the power went out. A storm had rolled in off the mountains, brutal sheets of rain, wind that snapped old trees like matchsticks. The backup generators failed. Security cameras cut to static. When power returned at dawn, the freezer door was wide open. The slab was empty. No signs of forced entry. No muddy footprints, no fingerprints. Just the faint smell of wet earth lingering in the hall. Deputy Warren took one look and promptly resigned. Dr. Price locked herself in her office for hours, emerging pale and trembling. Her official statement only read, "The remains are missing under circumstances that defy logical explanation." And the story of Eli Weaver, once just a chilling local legend, now morphed into something far darker, a living nightmare. Chapter 3, The Return to Halston Hollow. It didn't take long for word of the vanished corpse to hit every screen in America. Within hours of the local sheriff's grim press conference, where he offered nothing but no comment pending investigation, news vans again descended on Halston Hollow like a murder of crows. Helicopters chopped the air overhead. Reporters set up along Main Street, shoving microphones at anyone who'd ever known the name Weaver. Old-timers muttered that it was the 80s all over again, only worse. Because this time they weren't just chasing a curiosity. They were chasing something that terrified them, even if they couldn't quite admit why. Within days, strangers began showing up in droves. True crime podcasters, paranormal thrill seekers, YouTubers hungry for viral footage. They wandered the edges of the old Weaver property, live-streaming themselves poking around the boarded windows, daring each other to knock on the front door. Some brought Ouija boards. Others came armed. Locals watched from behind drawn curtains. Pastor Miller at the Baptist Church organized nightly prayer vigils. He told his congregation, voice trembling, that evil had been invited back into our midst, wearing the familiar face of a lost little boy. Attendance swelled until people stood shoulder to shoulder in the aisles, clutching worn Bibles. Meanwhile, online communities erupted with theories. A Reddit thread titled Eli Weaver, The Undying Child, grew to hundreds of thousands of followers overnight. Posts ranged from wild speculation about secret government labs using Halston Hollow as a dumping ground, to detailed amateur research tracing ancient folklore, stories of changelings, of spirits that took the shape of children to lure victims into the woods. One user posted grainy photographs allegedly taken near the old mill pond, small footprints in the mud that stopped abruptly at the water's edge, as though the child had simply vanished mid-step. Another claimed to have used an infrared drone to scan the forest behind the Weaver house, and swore it picked up a humanoid heat signature crouched high in the trees. The drone crashed seconds later. In town, things went from uneasy to downright sinister. Small animals began turning up dead again, much like they had decades before. At first it was raccoons and possums, found with their bellies split open in neat, almost surgical lines. Then 2 family dogs were discovered in a back lot, laid out side by side, eyes wide and glassy. The vet refused to speculate on the cause of death, only muttering that, whatever did this, it wasn't a coyote. Children, too young to remember the original Weaver legend, started having nightmares. Parents shared hushed stories in grocery aisles of kids waking up screaming about a boy at the window, or finding dirty, small handprints on their second-story glass. In every case, by the time the parents rushed to look, there was nothing there. Then came the trespassers. A pair of amateur ghost hunters broke into the Weaver house one night, hoping for EVP recordings and jump scares to boost their subscriber count. Their live stream cut out 20 minutes in, after a series of bizarre clicking noises overwhelmed the audio. The police found them at dawn, wandering along the roadside barefoot, clothes torn and eyes vacant. They couldn't remember how they'd left the house, or why one of them had deep, parallel scratches running down his spine. Inside the house, investigators found odd things rearranged. The old Bible was back on the table, open to a different page than before. Dust was disturbed in a perfect ring on the living room floor. And a faint, foul smell lingered, like damp soil mixed with rot. Deputy Sarah Quinn, one of the few willing to keep watch on the place after Warren's resignation, installed motion-sensitive cameras around the property. For 3 nights nothing happened. On the 4th, at precisely 3:12 a.m., every camera malfunctioned at once, screens filling with static before abruptly cutting to black. When feed resumed 2 minutes later, the front porch was slick with muddy footprints. Tiny ones. News of this spread like wildfire. Footage leaked of the distorted static. Conspiracy channels online claimed they could hear faint childlike giggles layered in the electronic noise if you slowed it down. Others insisted they saw brief frames of a small face in the interference, eyes milky and unblinking. Pastor Miller declared it was proof the town had become a spiritual battleground. He warned families to keep crosses above every door, salt their thresholds and avoid the woods at dusk. But some were drawn by the danger. More outsiders came, hoping to catch something on camera that would launch them to internet fame. It was only a matter of time before someone vanished. And they did. A college film crew arrived one Friday evening, 3 students from out of state, eager to make a name for themselves with a documentary. They set up camp near the treeline behind the Weaver property, boasting on social media that they'd stay all night. Their last post was at 2:08 a.m. The video showed them laughing nervously, the wind rustling leaves around them. A faint voice seemed to whisper from deeper in the trees. One of them called out, "Who's there?" and panned his camera around. Just empty woods. The clip ended abruptly. They were reported missing by Sunday when frantic parents couldn't reach them. A search party found their tents shredded, gear strewn in the dirt, but no blood, no tracks leading away. Just one strange detail. At the center of their abandoned camp was a small pile of smooth stones stacked in a neat spiral. The sheriff's office, overwhelmed and terrified, put up barricades around the Weaver place. Pastor Miller pleaded from the pulpit for the community to turn inward, pray harder, and prepare for the evil that walks among us. His sermons took on an almost frantic edge, warning that Eli was not alone, that such entities rarely are. Meanwhile, the rest of the country watched from a safe distance, transfixed by the unfolding nightmare. Talk shows brought on experts to debate whether the town was experiencing mass hysteria, or if something truly unexplainable stalked the hollow. And all the while, under the clammy summer air, Halston Hollow seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next terrible chapter to begin. Chapter 4, Whispers in the Hollow. By late August, Halston Hollow wasn't so much a town anymore as a wound that refused to close. Gone were the lazy afternoons of porch gossip and barefoot children running through sprinklers. The streets now lay mostly empty, save for anxious faces peering from behind curtains, eyes darting at every stray sound. Pastor Miller's sermons had become the only place folks still gathered, though more from fear than faith. On Sundays, the little church overflowed, people clutching each other's hands so tightly that knuckles blanched. Miller's voice, once warm and steady, now broke as he spoke of dark forces moving unseen, of ancient debts finally coming due. He warned them to keep their homes salted, to place iron nails above doorframes. "It's not superstition," he rasped one morning, sweat dripping from his brow despite the chill that had settled over town. "It's all that stands between your children and whatever walks these streets at night." People nodded, too frightened to argue. Even those who'd once scoffed now sprinkled salt across their thresholds, nailed crosses into their yards, muttered half-remembered prayers as they locked up before dusk. Still, it wasn't enough. Rumors bloomed like mold. Mrs. Penfield, who lived alone on the edge of town, swore she woke to find muddy footprints circling her bed. She tried to clean them only to see more appear the next night, this time leading right up to her closet. The next morning she was gone, front door ajar, kettle still warm on the stove. The sheriff found her nightgown torn on a tree branch at the edge of the woods, a smear of something dark trailing down the bark. Elsewhere, dogs howled at empty yards, tails tucked, refusing to step past certain gates. Cats disappeared entirely. School was suspended indefinitely after 3 children collapsed in class, convulsing and muttering about the boy with too many eyes under their breath. Leonard Haskins, the local historian, became obsessed. He practically lived in the courthouse archives, hunting scraps of forgotten ledgers that spoke of a breakaway sect called the Root Keepers. They'd settled Halston Hollow in the 1800s, carving symbols into tree trunks, burying iron chains wound with hair and teeth. Their journals, fragile with age, spoke of a child-shaped shadow born from grief and hunger, needing bodies to wear. Leonard tried to warn the town. At a hastily called meeting in the old library, he spread cracked pages across a long oak table, hands shaking as he read aloud. They fed it offerings, bits of bone, strands of hair, still warm blood. Not out of worship, but to keep it satisfied, trapped beneath the soil. If those bindings ever failed. He never finished. The lights went out with a loud pop, plunging the room into darkness. By the time lanterns were lit, the papers were gone, ripped from the table. Someone, or something, had taken them. Leonard was never the same. Days later, his house burned to the ground in 3 separate blazes that investigators said looked almost ritualistic. They found him clutching a melted cross, eyes wide in terror, mouth black with soot. After that, even skeptics fell silent. Meanwhile, inside homes across Halston Hollow, strange things crept. Floors creaked under the weight of invisible feet. Faucets turned themselves on, spilling rusty water into sinks at midnight. Children woke with nosebleeds, muttering nonsense. Some refused to go near their closets, insisting a boy stood just inside, smiling, waiting for them to sleep. The Carmichaels learned this terror firsthand. It started small. Mrs. Carmichael swore she heard laughter in her backyard, though when she looked, there was nothing but her garden, slightly trampled. Then came scratches on their window glass, shallow but deliberate, forming a crude spiral. One night, Mr. Carmichael jolted awake to see his wife standing stiff at the bedroom door, eyes glassy. She turned to him and whispered, "He wants in." He shook her hard. She blinked, confused, then began to sob. They called Pastor Miller. He arrived at dawn, breath clouding despite the lingering summer. He sprinkled oil on their doorframes, pressed trembling hands to the children's foreheads. "Keep them inside after dark. And pray like you've never prayed before." But prayer proved brittle. That week, the front door slammed open at 2 a.m. A cold wind gusted through the hall, carrying the rank smell of damp soil. Mr. Carmichael grabbed his rifle, heart battering his ribs. He found muddy prints leading down the hallway, small, barefoot. They climbed up the wall in a crazy zigzag, disappeared into the ceiling. He followed them into the kitchen. There, sitting cross-legged on the table, was Eli, or what had once been Eli. Its skin looked too thin, veins dark beneath the surface. Its smile stretched wider than it should, teeth small and sharp. It cocked its head, eyes glittering with an intelligence far too old. Mr. Carmichael fired. The sound shattered plates in the cupboard. By the time the smoke cleared, the table was empty. Just a smear of black sludge where the creature had perched, and a low, echoing giggle that faded into the walls. Word spread fast. Families stopped answering knocks at their doors, even from friends. Pastor Miller began nightly patrols with lanterns, pacing streets lined with trembling curtains. Some nights, people spotted him stopping under old oaks, head bowed, as if arguing with something they couldn't see. On the last Sunday of September, he mounted the pulpit, voice hoarse, eyes ringed with dark circles. "It's here because we let it in. We fed its legend. We gave it shape. Now it walks freely, wearing the face of sorrow we never laid to rest." People wept openly. Outside, the sky darkened with unnatural speed, clouds roiling like something alive. That night, Halston Hollow felt poised on a knife's edge. A collective breath held tight, every house lit bright against the encroaching dark. And somewhere beyond the tree line, small feet padded over damp earth, coming closer. Chapter 5. The Binding That Failed. October arrived with a cold that bit deeper than any autumn chill should. Frost crawled over windows by dusk, no matter what the thermometer said. Even fireplaces couldn't quite chase away the clammy air that settled inside walls, thick with mildew and something sour, like meat left out too long. By then, Halston Hollow was half abandoned. Entire families packed their lives into battered trucks and vanished down the highway. Those who stayed barred their doors with furniture, hammered iron nails into every threshold. Each night, the streets lay empty, yet alive with faint echoes, tiny footsteps skipping just out of sight, the high piping of a child's laughter carried on bitter wind. Inside their homes, people sat with guns across their laps, rosaries wound tight around trembling fists. Few slept. When they did, their dreams were thick with rot and whispers, pleading voices that sounded like loved ones long dead. Pastor Miller refused to leave. Exhaustion had hollowed out his face. His skin sagged under his eyes in bruised crescents. Still he moved house to house, blessing rooms, sprinkling salt that always seemed swept away by morning. His once steady hand now shook so badly he spilled oil across floors. "It's feeding on us doubting," he muttered to Mrs. Boyd one evening, voice cracking. "Our fear is a feast. That boy's shape, it's just a vessel for something older, cleverer. If we don't bind it again, it'll move beyond this town." Others began to murmur the same. Among them was old Henry Crawley, a farmer whose great-grandfather once kept detailed journals about the root keepers. Henry pulled those cracked books from a trunk beneath his bed, hands trembling. Inside were hand-drawn diagrams of spirals surrounded by chains, instructions written in an archaic scrawl. Blood to seal, iron to trap, scripture to hush the mouth. One by one, terrified neighbors gathered in Henry's barn, clutching lanterns, coats pulled tight. The floor was littered with hay that did little to warm them. Pastor Miller stood at the center, reading from the old root keeper notes, voice hoarse but rising with desperate authority. "We'll place the chains in a ring outside the Weaver house, soak them in oil and our own blood, then recite these passages. It may be madness, but it's madness or watching this spread to every soul beyond these woods." No one argued. Faces pale and pinched, they slit their palms with shaky knives, smearing iron links with crimson. When they stepped out into the night, breath fogged before them like smoke. Lantern light flickered wildly, shadows jumping and twisting ahead. They reached the Weaver property by midnight. The house loomed, shingles missing, windows black and hollow as eye sockets. The yard stank of damp soil and something sweeter, almost cloying. As they laid the chain circle, one by one, small shapes flitted at the edges of the trees. Not quite children, not quite anything human. Eyes gleamed, reflecting lantern flames and cruel, hungry pinpricks. "Don't look at them," Pastor Miller rasped. "Keep your eyes on the work." They finished the circle, standing together, hands linked, dripping blood onto the ground. Miller began to chant passages from the brittle rootkeeper texts. His words faltered as the air thickened, pushing back against their chests, making it hard to draw breath. Then came the laughter. High, brittle, echoing from everywhere at once. The lantern flames stretched, then twisted into thin lines before snuffing out entirely. For a heartbeat there was only darkness and the thunder of each person's panicked pulse. When light returned, from nowhere, not lanterns, not the moon, they saw him. Eli standing inside the circle, small hands clasped before him. His eyes were bottomless pits sucking in all light. He smiled, revealing rows of tiny, jagged teeth. "Is this your plan?" he asked, voice a child's but echoing with something cavernous. "Chains and whispers? Your grandfathers tried this too. You saw how that ended." Henry fell to his knees, sobbing. Miller clutched his Bible so hard his knuckles split, dripping fresh blood onto the yellowed pages. The figure of Eli tilted its head, studying them like insects pinned to a card. Then it stepped forward. The chains burst apart with a sound like cracking bones, metal flying into the trees. Mrs. Boyd screamed as something unseen yanked her backward, her body disappearing into the dark so fast her shoes stayed behind. Panic exploded. Some ran for the road, crashing through brambles, tearing skin on thorns. Others dropped where they stood, praying so loudly their words tangled into meaningless babble. Pastor Miller remained rooted, chanting fragments of scripture even as tears streamed down his face. Eli, or whatever wore Eli's skin, drifted closer, his feet never quite touching the earth. "I was never meant to sleep forever," he whispered. "But your fear is a cradle. You rock me awake every night." He reached out a hand toward Miller. The pastor's breath hitched, mouth working soundlessly. Then he dropped to the ground like a marionette with cut strings, eyes staring blankly at the sky. The Bible fell from his hands, pages fluttering in the sudden wind. And then, just as suddenly, all went still. The house stood silent again, dark windows reflecting the trembling survivors. Of Eli there was no sign. Only the twisted, blood-slicked chains scattered through the grass. By dawn, those left alive limped back into town. Word spread quickly that the ritual had failed, or worse, that it had unleashed something fully awake at last. Doors were bolted tighter than ever. Fathers nailed planks over windows from the inside, mothers wept over children who refused to eat, staring vacantly into corners. And through it all, Halston Hollow seemed to sigh, as if relieved its oldest tenant had finally come home. That night stretched on forever. In living rooms and kitchens across Halston Hollow, people huddled by candlelight, whispering prayers that felt stale on their tongues. Every creak of wood or sigh of wind turned heads sharply toward dark hallways. A family on Cedar Street tried to flee at first light. They loaded their truck in near silence, children pale and shivering under blankets. But as the engine started, a shape darted across their yard, small, barefoot, grinning. The truck stalled. When the father tried again, he found the steering wheel slick with something warm and sticky. He stumbled out, wiping his hands on his jeans, heart thundering. When he looked up, the yard was empty. They abandoned the vehicle right there and bolted back inside, locking every latch they owned. Hours later, neighbors peeking through blinds saw the truck doors still ajar, the seats smeared with muddy handprints that crawled up the ceiling. Elsewhere, small tragedies mounted. Mrs. Penfield, who had scoffed at salt lines and iron charms, awoke to find her entire kitchen rearranged, chairs stacked upside down, forks stabbed into the floorboards in spirals. At the center stood a tiny figure made of twigs bound with red string, its head topped with a clump of hair that looked disturbingly like her own. She vomited right there on the linoleum, unable to tear her gaze away. And then there were the whispers. They slithered through thin walls, slipped under doors, curled around sleeping heads. A girl named Lucy May woke screaming, hands clawing at her ears. When her mother ran in, Lucy just stared at her, eyes unfocused, lips moving soundlessly. Later, she began repeating a single phrase over and over in a child's sing-song. "He's not done. He's still hungry." By dawn, Pastor Miller's body was laid out in the church nave. No one touched him. His skin had grayed, lips pulled back over teeth in a rictus of terror. Someone lit candles around him, hoping it might do some good, but their flames sputtered oddly, bending away as if repelled by his corpse. Henry Crawley, who had led so much of the desperate ritual, was last seen stumbling down Main Street at sunrise, muttering to himself, clutching a bundle of rusted chain links. A passing deputy tried to stop him. Henry only laughed, a dry, broken sound, before shoving the deputy aside and wandering out of town, vanishing into the tree line beyond the mill. By evening, Halston Hollow was barely holding together. The people left behind understood, though none would say it out loud. Whatever haunted their woods, whatever had worn Eli's innocent face, was now free to roam wherever it pleased. And outside their bolted doors, the hollow itself seemed to breathe. Branches scraped windows without wind. Dirt shifted in gardens. From dark corners of empty rooms came the faintest sound, almost like a child's giggle muffled by earth. Chapter 6, Echoes Beyond the Hollow. By mid-October, Halston Hollow was no longer a town, it was a quarantine zone in everything but name. Hand-painted signs appeared at the county line. "Turn back, nothing here for you." Sheriff's deputies, what few remained loyal, set up makeshift checkpoints with nailed boards and rusty oil drums. They stopped cars, turned away curiosity seekers, even threatened reporters at gunpoint. Inside, life contracted to tight little pockets of fear. Entire streets stood vacant, their houses dark, mailboxes gaping with weeks of ignored envelopes. The grocery closed after the owner's teenage son disappeared one afternoon on a short walk to fetch milk. The boy never came back, only his shoes were found by a gnarled oak, neatly side by side, laces untied. Some families barricaded themselves so thoroughly they might have survived for months on canned peaches and powdered milk. But supplies dwindled, tempers flared, and even the bravest hearts found themselves peering too long out windows at shapes moving between trees. At night the hollow breathed. You could feel it, a subtle rhythmic pulling of the air, as if the earth itself drew deep lungfuls of the terrified collective scent. And with every breath it took, something grew stronger. Pastor Miller was dead and Henry Crawley had never returned. Without them, there was no one left willing to lead prayers or rituals. Those who tried on their own met quick, chilling ends. Mrs. Carlin, the piano teacher, attempted to read from the old rootkeeper notes she found in a neighbor's abandoned house. Her husband found her hours later on the living room floor, hands clamped so tightly over her ears they'd bled through her palms. Her mouth hung open, tongue bit nearly in half. Worse still were the whispers. They didn't stop at night anymore. They slid along floorboards in the afternoon, curled under door cracks even in bright sun. Sometimes they sounded like children playing, soft little giggles that faded just as you strained to hear. Other times they mimicked loved ones, a mother long dead, a brother who moved away decades before. They called names with perfect, aching familiarity. And if anyone was foolish enough to answer, the whispers fell silent, only to erupt later in sobbing, muffled behind walls too low for words. Meanwhile, the outside world began to claw at the edges. Not with aid, with hunger. The first to arrive were men in dark SUVs, government plates conspicuously absent. They prowled the barricades, flashing badges no one quite recognized. They asked about sightings, demanded access to the Weaver house. Deputies turned them away at gunpoint, but the strangers merely smiled, retreated to their vehicles and watched from a distance. That night, the checkpoint burned, oil drums burst in flames that cast long leaping shadows. By dawn, no trace of the men or their cars remained. Then came others even stranger. A cluster of young people from out west, driving dusty vans, arrived claiming to be spiritual siphons, saying they could cleanse the hollow by channeling its energy into themselves. They set up camp in the old cemetery. By morning they were gone, tents flattened, ashes of their small ritual fires swirling through gravestones. Only a single shoe remained, perched absurdly atop a mossy cross. Locals stopped trying to intervene. Each attempt ended in more vanishings, more quiet funerals for people with eyes wide open in terror. And still, Halston Hollow pulsed with life not its own. Inside shuttered homes, families began turning on each other. A father strangled his wife, claiming her voice kept changing at night. A mother drowned her daughter in a bathtub, saying she'd woken to find the girl's hands were on backwards. Deputies who investigated these crimes came back pallid, hollow-eyed, or didn't return at all. Meanwhile, further afield, stories began leaking into regional news. A hiker 30 miles north went missing, his campsite found torn apart. A truck driver who stopped on an old county road near the hollow stumbled into a diner hours later, barefoot and rambling about small faces in the dark, whispering secrets. By the time police arrived, he'd slit his own throat in the bathroom stall. On forums, clips surfaced of dashcams picking up pale figures standing by trees along lonely highways, figures gone when cars backed up to look. Amateur sleuths obsessed over Halston Hollow's coordinates, plotting them against old maps of mining claims, ancient settlements, even alleged ley lines. Always they found coincidences that made their skin crawl. In town, people simply endured. They sealed bedrooms with nails and salt, kept lanterns burning through the night. But even so, sleep became a haunted thing. Dreams tangled with glimpses of damp tunnels, tiny hands pulling at their legs, breath hot against their ears. Sometimes they woke to find dirt in their beds, or small teeth under their pillows. Once, a woman found her toddler standing by the window at 3 a.m., humming an old hymn no one in her family knew. When she scooped him up, he smiled, but his eyes were black as spilled ink. As October clawed toward its end, Halston Hollow waited. The townsfolk had stopped talking about escape. Now they merely hoped to survive each night. And somewhere, out beyond their cracked windows and trembling candle flames, something old and patient watched them huddle. It was no longer content to haunt just their woods. It had tasted their terror, felt it bloom under their skin. And soon, perhaps very soon, it would step past their thresholds and into the wider world. It didn't stop with Halston Hollow. By Halloween, neighboring towns began to whisper about odd disturbances. Livestock found dead in perfect rings, entrails neatly coiled, eyes missing. Small barefoot prints pressed into muddy driveways, leading nowhere. Dogs refused to go outdoors after dark, whining at closed doors with hackles raised. Local radio stations ran jittery call-in shows. A trucker swore he'd seen a cluster of children standing along the shoulder of Route 9 at midnight, hands linked, heads bowed. When he slowed, one lifted its face, blank and eyeless, and the whole line dispersed like smoke. His rig fishtailed, crashing into a ditch. He lived, but the paramedics found him curled in the cab, chanting a nursery rhyme no one recognized. Meanwhile, back in the hollow, People clung to whatever scraps of sanity they could. Windows stayed boarded. Meals were taken in silence. Parents watched their children with wary eyes, flinching at the slightest odd behavior. It became common practice to check for dirt under fingernails each morning, for tiny scratches at ankles or wrists, anything that might mean they'd wandered in sleep to places they should not have. And sometimes they found more. The Kilner family, once the pride of the church choir, was discovered dead in their parlor. Mother, father, and 2 young sons seated neatly in armchairs, hands folded as if in prayer. Their eyes had been removed, leaving dark, glistening holes. A note lay on the coffee table in smudged, childish script. He said we'd see better this way. The deputy who found them staggered outside and vomited on the porch. Later that night, he put a bullet through his own temple, leaving behind a short, scrawled line in his notebook. I can still hear them laughing. Across the hollow, lanterns burned lower, oil running out. Salt trails smeared by damp air grew patchy, broken. Some people tried to reinforce their defenses with Bible pages nailed to doors, family heirlooms hung from ceilings. But nothing could keep the whispering out. It threaded through walls, found every ear, every heart already cracked by fear. Farther out, in towns that had once rolled their eyes at Halston's old legends, rumors began to grow. A farmer's wife 20 miles north was found wandering naked through cornfields at dawn, skin covered in tiny bites. In her hand, she clutched a clump of fine dark hair that wasn't her own. In the next county over, 3 teenagers vanished while ghost hunting, their abandoned camcorder later recovered, filled with footage of twisting black shapes darting between trees, voices repeating in a sing-song. Not yours. Not yours. Ours. It became clear to anyone paying attention that this wasn't ending at the county line. Whatever had been buried with Eli Weaver, whatever the root keepers once held fast with iron and blood, was loose, hungry, and learning. And somewhere, beneath floorboards or out among the frost-laced pines, it waited, patient as rot, certain it would find its way into every town that dared listen too closely. Chapter 7, Beyond the Hollow. By November, the name Halston Hollow had become a warning whispered far beyond its county. News stations that once mocked local superstition now ran grave segments, urging non-essential travel be avoided in the Tri-County area. Satellite images circulated online, showing clusters of abandoned homes, blackouts that crept outward night by night, like an ink spill on old paper. Yet no official statements acknowledged why. No state of emergency was declared. Those who lived closest said the authorities simply stopped coming. Checkpoints stood unmanned, patrol cars left to rust on the shoulders of county roads, doors hanging open as if their drivers had simply stepped out for air and never returned. Inside Halston Hollow, those who remained were no longer truly living. Windows stayed dark. Houses filled with the stale scent of sweat and old blood. People moved room to room like sleepwalkers, eyes hollow, jumping at their own reflections. Sometimes entire families would vanish overnight, leaving half-eaten dinners molding on tables. Others lingered in crueler fates. Mrs. Redding was found by a neighbor after 3 days of silence, rocking gently in her front parlor, arms cradling a bundle that turned out to be a pile of gray matted leaves. When spoken to, she only hissed. He told me she'd come back if I held her tight. In a farmhouse 2 miles beyond the Weaver property, a young couple had scrawled dozens of spirals across their walls in dark, rusty streaks. They were discovered seated on the kitchen floor, foreheads touching, eyes open and fixed on the ceiling, lips parted in identical silent smiles. On the table between them sat a plate, meticulously arranged with small teeth. Meanwhile, far outside the hollow's borders, the infection grew. A teacher in Mill Creek, 30 miles northeast, led her second-grade class in morning songs. Halfway through, she froze, eyes widening, then began to weep. Children reported she started whispering a string of names none of them recognized before fainting dead away. She awoke screaming about the little ones under the floorboards. That afternoon, she was committed to the county psychiatric ward. Elsewhere, hunters deep in Pine Valley stumbled upon crude effigies dangling from branches, shapes of children bound with twine, bits of fabric that turned out to be cut from missing persons' clothes. A week later, one hunter shot himself on his porch, leaving a note. They stood around my bed last night, counting. Online, armchair researchers mapped every incident. The pattern was unmistakable, a slow outward crawl from the hollow, fingers spreading. Reddit forums bloomed with frantic speculation. Was it a contagion? A mass psychosis? Or something far older, patient and clever enough to slip inside eager, fearful minds? Some tried to laugh it off. They organized hollow tours, packing into vans with cameras and beer, hoping for ghost stories to boast about later. Few returned. Those who did arrived hollow-eyed, silent, hands twitching as though pulling invisible strings. Reports trickled in of entire households found dead behind locked doors, claw marks on the insides of windows. In one town, a mother drowned her 3 children in the river, then walked calmly to a diner, soaked dress dripping on the tile floor. She ordered a slice of pie and smiled when police arrived, saying only, "They asked me to. They said the Hollow's hungry." Meanwhile, the Weaver house itself stood unchanged. Travelers who reached it, fewer every week, described a building that seemed almost to breathe. Its roof sagged like a sigh, windows glinting wetly even in drought. Some swore they saw faces peering from behind curtains. Others heard music, a faint child's lullaby that turned sour the closer they got. The old chain circle, shattered during the failed binding, lay scattered through the grass, rusted and half-buried. Some pieces vanished altogether. Locals muttered that the earth had swallowed them, or something beneath had pulled them down. Within Halston Hollow the survivors grew fewer, stranger. They walked roads barefoot, humming to themselves, eyes rolled back. Some gathered nightly at the center of town, forming crude spirals of pebbles and bone, chanting words that didn't belong to any known language. A journalist who snuck in for photographs sent a final text before his signal died. "They're welcoming something. Or someone." Days later, his camera was found in the gutter outside town. The last photo on the roll showed a group of people standing hand in hand, circling a small figure with a wide, dark grin, unmistakably Eli, though his skin seemed thinner now, almost translucent, veins pulsing with a blackness that moved like smoke. And all the while the world outside watched. Law enforcement agencies issued bland statements about isolated incidents. Epidemiologists denied any disease outbreak. But freight companies quietly rerouted trucks. Airlines adjusted flight paths. Small towns nearby emptied almost overnight, residents choosing unknown futures over staying too close to that ever-widening stain. Through it all, the legend of Halston Hollow metastasized. Podcasts analyzed audio distortions from police radios. TikToks tried to meme it away, dancing in front of forests that breathed on camera. But in quiet hours, when screens dimmed and rooms settled, many who laughed during daylight found themselves staring at dark corners, breath held, listening for giggles they prayed weren't real. Because somehow they all knew, the Hollow wasn't done. It never would be. It had slipped its bounds, seeping along power lines, creeping through cables and whispered fears. It had tasted the world beyond its trees. And it was hungry. It didn't take long before bigger cities began to feel the pull. In the state capital, 200 miles from Halston Hollow, a popular morning news anchor broke off mid-segment, blinking rapidly. Her co-host reached for her arm, confused. The woman turned to face the camera, eyes suddenly glassy, and began to hum a thin, tuneless melody. Then she laughed, a high, brittle sound that set viewers on edge, before collapsing behind the desk. Millions watched live. That clip replayed endlessly online, the sound distorted, looping that eerie laugh. Hospitals reported sharp upticks in sleep disorders, night terrors, and children waking with scratches down their backs. Pets whimpered at walls, clawed at doors until their paws bled. Neighborhoods organized prayer circles not out of piety, but from a desperate sense that something was coming, rolling across counties, unstoppable. Meanwhile, people across the region began finding tiny signs they couldn't explain. Spirals drawn in condensation on bathroom mirrors. Clumps of dark hair tangled in bed sheets. Footprints in attic dust, small, barefoot, always stopping just before the hatch. Online forums exploded. Threads with tens of thousands of comments tried to chart the spread like an epidemic. They noted patterns in power outages, clusters of missing persons, even spikes in birth complications. Amateur cartographers layered old folklore maps over new satellite data, and the lines matched more often than coincidence could explain. "It's following the old paths," one user posted. "Like rivers? Or veins?" Back in Halston Hollow, the last few who still claimed their minds moved in small, terrified clusters. Some boarded together in a single house, too afraid to sleep alone. They whispered of seeing Eli, or things wearing Eli's shape, standing under street lamps, waving in that slow, deliberate way children did when waiting for playmates. Once, a woman claimed she watched from an upstairs window as he tilted his head back and opened his mouth impossibly wide. Something thick and black spilled out, writhing on the asphalt before sinking into the cracks. Outside the Hollow, copycat horrors sprang up. In a small city to the west, an entire apartment block was evacuated after residents complained of children knocking on doors at 3 a.m., asking to come inside. Those who answered weren't seen again, their units later found empty, TVs still glowing with static. One chilling night, a live streamer tried to capitalize on the frenzy. He stood at the edge of a forest notorious for disappearances, joking to his chat, waving his flashlight around. Thousands watched as his breath fogged, his voice caught mid-laugh. "You guys hear that? Sounds like kids?" Then his camera swung sharply. In the distance stood a loose circle of small figures, hands linked. Their faces were indistinct blurs, but the way their heads all turned in unison made stomachs twist. The streamer dropped the camera. The feed filled with spinning leaves, muffled crunching footsteps, then only a long, low giggle that crackled through blown-out speakers. They never found him. His channel stayed online, auto-playing that final video to horrified new viewers who claimed if you listened closely, you could hear your own name whispered just before the end. And still the stories grew. Rural towns emptied overnight. Entire highways lay littered with abandoned cars, doors flung open, headlights burning into empty fields. Police reports piled up. Missing children, people found wandering with blank eyes and muddy feet. In big cities, therapists struggled with patients who dreamed of spirals, of being pulled down into dark soil by countless tiny hands. By now it was clear, this was no longer just Halston Hollow's curse. Whatever lay chained in its dirt for generations had finally been set free. And it would not stop until it wore the world like it once wore the face of a 9-year-old boy. Epilogo, the hollow inside us. No official records exist of what truly happened in Halston Hollow after that final cold November. The town's population dwindled to fewer than 100 souls, most of whom never left their homes again. Mailboxes overflowed, gardens strangled themselves in vines, roofs caved under slow, indifferent decay. The last census taker who attempted to count heads was found wandering along a gravel road 12 miles away, shoes missing, mumbling about children hiding under the frost. But it didn't matter anymore if the hollow was counted. Its story had already left the woods. Farther out, in suburban cul-de-sacs, in city towers that scraped November's thin gray sky, the same whispers threaded through thin drywall. Families awoke to find tiny footprints across living room rugs, or teeth that didn't belong to anyone in the household, left in neat piles on kitchen counters. People opened closets to take down coats and found spirals scratched into the back walls, fresh enough to weep dust. Reports surfaced of children sitting upright in their beds at precisely 3:12 a.m., humming low, tuneless melodies until blood trickled from their noses. A woman in Chicago woke to find her toddler had drawn dozens of small stick figures along the hallway, each with eyes punched through the drywall. When she scrubbed them away the next night they returned, only taller. Psych wards filled with patients who couldn't stop chanting strings of unfamiliar names. Emergency rooms logged inexplicable injuries, self-inflicted bites, deep scratches across backs as if someone was trying to claw something out from inside. In every case, patients described the same visions, of woods they'd never walked, of a boy smiling from the tree line, arms spread wide as if to welcome them home. Governments tried to suppress it. News stations were warned off the hollow story, calling it a mass localized hysteria. Articles were quietly retracted. Videos disappeared from platforms overnight. But for every digital deletion, another story took root in whispered conversation. In bars, in hushed phone calls, in the deep hours when sleepless souls confessed they too had heard giggling outside their bedroom windows. One man posted online about driving through a deserted stretch of I-77 at midnight. His dashcam caught a flicker of movement, small figures dancing just beyond the shoulder. When he slowed, headlights swept over dozens of faces turned toward him, eyes blank, mouths parted in perfect unison. The video was taken down within hours, but by then it had been copied thousands of times, dissected frame by frame. Some swore you could see Eli there, standing slightly apart, watching with his wide dark grin. Meanwhile, the hollow itself persisted, patient and thriving. The Weaver house still stood, though its roof had collapsed inward and windows lay shattered across warped floorboards. Those brave enough to approach said the place still seemed to breathe, its walls expanding and contracting with damp sighs. Small toys appeared on the porch overnight, wooden blocks, bits of string tied into loops, dolls with faces rubbed blank. No one dared touch them. Deeper in town, people rarely spoke above whispers. Those left alive moved with cautious steps, as if afraid to disturb something watching from beneath floorboards. Sometimes they found neighbors standing in yards at dawn, eyes fixed on nothing, lips moving without sound. When shaken, these husks only blinked and wandered back indoors, shutting doors gently behind them. Outside the hollow, in cities that once felt immune to small-town nightmares, new stories took shape. A teenager in Portland slit open her mattress after dreaming of something squirming beneath it, only to find claw marks scored deep into the wooden frame. A mother in Sao Paulo awoke to see her baby reaching not for her, but toward a shadow on the ceiling, cooing sweetly. In Tokyo, office workers arrived to find crude spirals etched across every glass window on their floor, like tiny hands had drawn them in breath. Researchers tried to build models, mapping incidents on global grids. Epidemiologists looked for viral patterns, cult experts scoured dark corners of the internet. But each found only tangled threads leading back to Halston Hollow, and to a boy who never grew beyond 9, whose grin still haunted brittle phone screens long after videos were erased. And somewhere, perhaps in every dim corner where fear pooled thickest, the Hollow's true voice whispered. It told people they were already his. That they'd always been. It promised that if they just let go, let the laughter come in, let the dark fill up all those hollow places inside, it wouldn't hurt at all. By the time the first global newscasters began cautiously reporting anomalous behavioral clusters, it was already far too late. Homes were emptying not because people fled but because they simply disappeared. Beds left rumpled, soup still steaming on stoves, televisions flickering static to no audience. In the last grainy cell phone video ever uploaded from Halston Hollow itself, a local boy stands barefoot on a cracked sidewalk, head tilted, eyes too dark to catch light. Behind him, dozens more figures gather in loose rows, hands linked, humming that thin, tuneless melody that by now half the world had dreamed of. As the camera shakes, the boy lifts one hand, beckoning. His mouth opens wider than it should, splitting nearly ear to ear. The video cuts to black. No one ever found the person who filmed it. And somewhere, in every quiet house left standing, dust gathers around tiny footprints. Floorboards creak under the weight of nothing. A low giggle flutters through empty rooms, waiting patiently for someone, anyone, to come listen. Extra, the hollow everywhere. Elsewhere, far from the rot of Halston Hollow, the same dark song threaded itself into lives that had never even heard the town's cursed name. In a bustling district of Seoul, commuters stepped off trains to find spiral shapes drawn in condensation across every window of a crowded subway car. Shapes that smeared when touched, but returned moments later, clearer and deeper. Security footage was pulled from circulation by authorities who cited public safety, though whispers claimed it showed more. Small figures pressing against the glass from the inside of the car, grinning through breath-fogged panels. A child psychologist in Sao Paulo began to catalog dream journals from a local school after parents complained of their children waking nightly, screaming about the boy with all the voices. Flipping through crayon sketches, she found page after page covered in repeating crude circles, tiny stick figures with hollow eyes. Her final report simply read, "These dreams aren't localized. I've received similar drawings from students in 3 separate provinces. I fear this is only the beginning." In a cramped church office in Dublin, Father Eamon kept stacks of handwritten confessions locked in a battered drawer. He pored over them nightly, hands trembling, lips mumbling half-remembered Latin as he read account after account of parishioners who dreamed of standing ankle-deep in damp earth, surrounded by soft giggling that rose until it drowned out their own heartbeat. One letter ended in a desperate scrawl. "He promised my pain would stop if I let him inside. What else could I do, Father?" Meanwhile, psychiatric wards from Toronto to Marrakesh logged a quiet epidemic. Patients rocking in corners, dirt packed under fingernails, murmuring about a hollow place that wanted to be filled. In some cases, staff found spiral patterns etched into bedsheets, scraped there by frantic hands until palms bled. Yet even as these horrors bloomed worldwide, Halston Hollow itself did not sleep. Journalists who risked the drive found streets eerily open, houses with doors wide as if welcoming visitors. Inside, dining tables sat laid with moldy plates, chairs pushed back abruptly. Bedrooms revealed beds still rumpled, impressions of bodies long gone, but not far. The air reeked of wet earth, sour like overturned graves. And beneath it all, the ground felt strangely hollow as if it were breathing from deep below. In one final unsettling report, a drone operator from a foreign documentary crew piloted his machine over the hollow. As it drifted above the ruins of the Weaver house, the feed grew patchy, glitching in static bursts. Then for a fleeting instant the camera plunged low beneath the sagging roof, showing shadows that seemed to bristle and turn. Just before the connection cut, dozens of small hands reached upward from the dark, stretching, beckoning. They pulled the footage, citing technical corruption. But local contractors who reviewed the raw files swore they heard a faint chorus on the last surviving audio, dozens of soft, breathy voices chanting in perfect unison. "Home, home, home." After that, few dared venture back. The hollow stood in its own rot, content to let the rest of the world unravel under the weight of spreading tales and infected dreams. In downtown high-rises or countryside cottages, people now listen for laughter that never quite seemed to come from the mouths of their children. They wiped tiny handprints off foggy windows each dawn, told themselves it was just condensation, just stray smudges. And somewhere, far beneath the cracked soil of Halston Hollow, or perhaps beneath every fragile place a frightened mind dared to imagine, something older than the hills waited with patient hunger, giggling quietly in the dark, certain that soon enough, the whole world would remember exactly how to kneel.